So we're going to start a series of 3 lectures on attention, and this will probably be new material for most of you. Attention isn't really covered in introductory psychology, but attention plays a major role in our psychology and in our cognition. Indeed, as we'll learn in these 3 lectures, attention is important for perceiving our world. It's sort of actually required if we want to perceive our world effectively. And so what we're going to look at today is a famous experiment known as dichotic listening. And the idea here is that this experiment sort of gets at what are we aware of when we are not attending to information. So think about the times when you've attended a lecture and you've become distracted and you've missed what the lecturer is saying. How much of that information that you're not attending to actually gets into your brain and reaches the level of understanding and memory? So we're going to look at that today in the context of a task known as dichotic listening. And we'll also look at some models of attention, so some early attempts to basically model using the information processing approach how we attend to our world and don't attend to our world. This lecture is based on chapter 4 in your textbook. So to start, what is attention? Right? I think we all have some sense of what attention is. We can attend to some things in our world and not attend to other things. So attention as defined is the ability to focus on specific stimuli or locations in our world. And as mentioned in the lecture on the history of psychology, or cognitive psychology I should say, attention was first studied by William James using introspection. And James famously wrote, "Everyone knows what attention is. It is the taking possession by the mind in clear and vivid form of one of several trains of thought. It implies withdraw from some things in order to deal effectively with others." So James is pointing out that we seem to be able to focus our attention on certain things, and when we do that, we sort of lose the ability to perceive other things. So how do we study attention in the laboratory? Well, in the 1950s, Colin Cherry devised a means to basically study attention using what's called dichotic listening. Dichotic listening involves presenting different stimuli to each ear. So in one ear, you'll hear one stream of audio. In the other ear, you'll hear a different stream of audio. And there are many different ways to do dichotic listening tasks, but in Cherry's experiment, what he had participants do was actually shadow one ear. So again, you're hearing 2 different streams of audio, one in each ear. And in Cherry's study, he asked you to shadow, for instance, what you were hearing from your left ear. And so the question Cherry is actually asking is, if you're shadowing what you're hearing in your left ear, and by shadowing I mean just repeating what you're hearing, if you're doing that, so you're paying a lot of attention to your left ear, you're shadowing the information, you're saying it out loud, what do you understand, what do you perceive from the stream of audio that you are not attending to? So Cherry didn't really care about whether or not you could actually do the shadowing task. That's something we can all do. He was interested in, when you're doing this task, what do you perceive, what do you understand from the stream of audio that you're actually not attending to? And so before we get at the results of this study, I'm just going to show you an example of dichotic listening. This is just a video from YouTube, and you'll see 2 different video streams, one on each side of your screen. And what you should find is that you're able to attend to either the left or the right, but not both simultaneously.
So my brother and I grew up together. My first job was actually probably as an Elvis impersonator. Kind of a smaller house. At this sandwich shop that was separated by Hawaiian style theme, and for some reason they were looking to have an Elvis impersonator come in on Wednesday nights. And I know what you're thinking. I don't look anything at all like Elvis, right? But somehow I convinced them that I could do it, and so I got the job. And I was, I think, maybe 17, maybe 16 at the time. I had no business being an Elvis impersonator, but I had a wig. And basically, I was like styled in like the jailhouse rock style Elvis.
So that was just an example of dichotic listening from YouTube. Again, this is normally done with listening, not with video as well. But what you should have found was that you're able to attend to either the left side of the screen or the right side of the screen, but probably not both at the same time. So jumping back to Cherry's dichotic listening study, where again, participants were hearing one stream of audio in the left ear and one stream in the right ear, and they were asked to shadow one ear. He found that participants could shadow the attended message, but he was interested in what did they pick up from that unattended stream of audio, and he found that actually they were able to perceive very little of what they had heard in the unattended ear. So they noticed a change in the gender of the speaker in the unattended ear, but they failed to notice a change in language. So very interesting finding. So they're noticing this unattended stream of audio. They notice if the pitch of the speaker's voice changes, right? So men tend to have a lower pitch to their voice than women. But they didn't notice actually if the stream changed from English to German. So the suggestion here, right, is that they're actually picking up very little from that unattended stream, almost nothing except for large, changes in the perceptual quality of the stream. And so this finding has become known as the cocktail party effect. We can focus on one stimulus while other stimuli that we're not attending to seem to be filtered out. And we've all sort of experienced this, right? You're at a party, it's very loud, lots of exciting things are happening around you, yet you're still able to have a conversation with somebody and focus on what they're saying. And when you do that, you're kind of filtering out everything else that's happening around you. So we've described attention on a behavioral level, right? We've shown using dichotic listening that you can focus on one sensory stimulus, perceive it, understand it, remember it, and you seem to filter out the things that you're not attending to. So how might we model this using the information processing approach to cognition? So again, thinking about Mars levels of analysis, as discussed in the very first lecture, right? We've described the phenomenon at the behavioral level. How might we model this at sort of the algorithmic level? And so models of attention tend to come in two flavors: early selection models and late selection models. And the early versus late distinction simply refers to where the filter of attention acts. So does that filter that is attention, and so when I say filter of attention, what I mean is that you process the things you're attending to, and the things that you are not attending to are filtered out. So where does that filter act? So does it act very early on, such that things you aren't attending to do not reach the level of understanding? They're not processed for semantics. Semantics simply means meaning. Or does the filter act later on, so that things you are not attending to can actually reach the level of meaning and understanding? And so early models of attention fell into these two categories: early selection versus late selection models of attention. And again, the early versus late distinction simply refers to where the filter that is attention actually acts. Does it act early on to basically block out everything that you're not attending to and all of that unintended information doesn't reach the level of understanding, or does it act a little bit later on so that some of that unintended information does reach the level of understanding? So the first model of attention was an early selection model proposed by Donald Broadbent, using this information processing approach. So this idea that cognitive processes occur in stages, just like a computer processes information. And so in Broadbent's filter model, and this was really based on Colin Cherry's dichotic listening results, everything is encoded in sensory memory. So our sensory receptors are taking in everything that's happening around us right now. Attention is like a filter, okay? And so the way attention works, only the attended message actually breaks through to the level of understanding. And things that are understood or perceived are then passed on to short-term memory, to working memory. So just to repeat that, sensory memory holds everything briefly. A filter identifies the attended message and blocks out all the rest. A detector processes the unattended sensory information, and so this processing, you can think of this as perception. And then the output is sent on to short-term memory and consciousness. And so this is an early selection model, right? Because only the attended message is processed to the level of meaning, to the level of consciousness. So, what's nice about, having a model like this, and I think a lot of psychology students often, say like, well, I don't understand the point of modeling. What's the point of building this, box and arrow diagram? The point is that it makes very, very clear predictions, right? This leads to experiments. We can test this model. So this model is proposing that information you're not attending to doesn't reach the level of meaning, doesn't reach the level of understanding. And so we can now design experiments that actually nicely test this model. And if we find evidence for the model, great. The model holds up. It explains this behavior. If we find evidence against the model, then we might have to reevaluate or reformulate our model. And actually, that's what happened. So in the 1950s and 60s, based on Colin Cherry's work with dichotic listening, based on Broadbent's filter model, some other psychologists designed experiments to test Broadbent's model using dichotic listening tasks. So again, different streams of audio, one in each ear. And they found that in some cases, some information from the unintended stream actually did break through to the level of understanding. In a famous study by Murray in 1959, it was shown that about a third of listeners perceived their name if it was inserted into that unattended stream. So again, a dichotic listening task, different streams of audio, one in each ear. You're paying attention to one ear. If your name is inserted into the stream of audio that you're not paying attention to, you perceive that. Okay, so you seem to perceive meaningful stimuli in the unattended ear. In a famous study by Gray and Wedderburn that was published in 1960, they showed that participants recall elements of the unattended stream if they give the attended stream meaning. So this is known as the Dear Aunt Jane experiment. Again, dichotic listening. Participants are hearing different streams of audio, one in each ear, and they're asked to shadow one of the ears, so attend to one of the streams. So in the stream they're attending to, they might hear something like Dear 7 Jane, and in the stream they're not attending to, they might hear something like 9 Aunt 6. And later on, when they're asked about what they heard, they actually remember Dear Aunt Jane. So they're taking information from that unattended stream and remembering it because it gives the attended stream in this case the left ear, meaning. So again, participants were called elements of the unattended stream if it gave the attended stream meaning. More fundamentally, right, we're seeing that, Broadbent's very strict early selection model just doesn't hold up. We're finding some evidence against the model. And so this led to a new model of attention proposed by Treisman. Treisman, very famous attention researcher at Princeton. And this was an early selection model, but it allowed for some meaningful information to sort of break through in the unattended stream to the level of understanding. And Treisman proposed that attention, again, sort of acts like a filter, but the filtering occurs in stages. And so in Treisman's model, an attenuator separates attended and unattended information based on, first, physical characteristics, second, linguistic characteristics, and third, meaning. So physical characteristics could be like, the pitch of the speaker's voice. Linguistic characteristics could be, for instance, the language that the speaker is using. And then finally, we have meaning, semantics. And so this is the sort of box and arrow diagram of Treisman's model. And so again, the senses are taking in everything. And we have this attenuator. And you can think of this attenuator as effectively attention. And so the attenuator obviously lets through the attended message. But the unattended stream, and again, the best way to think of these models is in terms of dichotic listening. Okay, so you're hearing one stream of audio in your right ear, one in your left. You're attending to one of those streams. And so the attenuator lets through the stream you're attending to, and it weakens the unattended stream. It weakens the stream that you're not attending to. And that information is passed on to what's called a dictionary unit. And you can think of this dictionary unit as a unit that extracts meaning, that extracts understanding, right? It's called a dictionary unit because, when you look up words in a dictionary, you can find their meaning. And so the key distinction between Treisman's leaky filter model and Broadbent's original filter model of attention is that some of the unattended message actually gets through. It's weakened, but it gets through. And so Treisman proposed that unattended information that is very, very meaningful, right, like your name, can still break through to the level of meaning, of understanding, and can even reach memory. Now, this model is an early selection model because the filter of attention is still acting early on, right? Most of the unattended stream doesn't get through to the level of understanding, only very meaningful stimuli. So it's still an early selection model. Do we see evidence for late selection? And again, the distinction between early and late is where the filter of attention acts. Does it primarily act before understanding or after? In the 1970s, using dichotic listening, Donald McKay presented ambiguous sentences in the attended stream. What is an ambiguous sentence? And it's a sentence that has a word that has multiple meanings, right? So they were throwing stones at the bank. What does bank mean in this case, right? It could be where you store your money. It could be the river bank. So this sentence is ambiguous. It's unclear. And what McKay showed in his study was that if you presented biasing words in the unattended stream, so a biasing word here would be like money or river, right? If you heard money, then you would interpret they were throwing stones at the bank as being the place where you stored your money. So what McKay showed was that this is exactly what happened. The meaning of the biasing word impacted participants' interpretation of this ambiguous sentence, even though they weren't attending to the biasing word. So these biasing words that on their own aren't very meaningful are breaking through the filter of attention and registering to the level of understanding, a level of meaning, to give these ambiguous sentences some context, some meaning. And so this is pretty strong evidence here for late selection in some cases. So thinking about all of the studies that we've reviewed so far, it seems like early selection can be demonstrated sometimes, and late selection can be demonstrated other times. There seems to be evidence for both, right? If we look at Cherry's original study, it seems like very little from the unintended stream is actually reaching the level of understanding. If we look at later studies, like the one we just reviewed run by McKay, it seems like information from that unintended stream can actually reach the level of understanding and impact your interpretation of the intended stream. So a newer idea is that how much of that attended stream actually reaches understanding depends on task difficulty. And under this new framework, known as perceptual load theory, attention is viewed as a resource. So what does that mean? It means that attention is kind of like an engine that puts out a certain amount of power. And so when you're doing a task that's very easy, that doesn't require all of your attention, think about driving a car, right? Driving a car on, a warm, clear summer's day. Okay, there's no traffic. You're driving along the 101 on the way to Halifax. Very easy drive. You're trying to pay attention, of course, to what you're doing, but some of your attentional capacity remains. So you can do other things. You can listen to a podcast. You can, talk to a passenger in the car. You could talk on your phone, but I wouldn't recommend doing that while you're driving. So in that situation, the task is what we call a low-load task. It's not sucking up all of your attentional capacity. And so you actually can pay attention, can understand things that you aren't primarily attending to. On the other hand, think of the situation where you're driving, along the 101 and there's a snowstorm. It's February. It's hard to see. It's at night, right? All of your attention is focused on that task. And none of your attentional capacity, none of your attentional engine remains to be applied to other things that are happening in your world. So the radio might be on, but you're not, perceiving or understanding any of what you're hearing because all of your attention is focused on driving in these terrible, terrible conditions. And so this is known as perceptual load theory. And again, the idea here is that attention is effectively a resource. Easy tasks use very little of the resource. Hard tasks use a lot of the resource. And what's nice about perceptual load theory is it explains a lot of differing results that we've reviewed in this lecture. So it explains a lot of the differing results that we've seen with dichotic listening, right? When the task is low load, when it's easy, there's capacity left over to attend to task irrelevant stimuli. So things you aren't attending to can actually reach the level of understanding, can reach the level of meaning. When the task is high load, there's no capacity left. So this predicts that in low load dichotic listening tasks, right, you're more likely to show late selection. You're more likely to process that unattended stream to the level of meaning, to the level of understanding, because there's more of your attentional capacity left to do this. In high load dichotic listening tasks, and arguably Cherry's original experiment was a high load dichotic listening tasks because participants had to shadow one stream. In high load tasks, there's less of this attentional resource left over. And so you don't process any of the unattended stream to the level of meaning. So perceptual load theory nicely captures sort of the differing effects that we see in the dichotic listening literature. And this is the prominent view now of how attention works. Attention is like a resource. Do we see evidence for this in the lab? Yeah, there are lots of different studies that show this. In this experiment by Forster and Lavie, published in 2008, participants were shown an array of letters, and they simply had to respond as quickly as they could if they saw an N or an X. And obviously, in this case, on the left here, the task is quite easy because you have clearly this letter that you need to respond to, an N, and all of the distractors are the same. They're all O's. So very easy to spot an N or an X in this case. In the case on the right here, it's much more difficult because all of the distractors are different letters. So you actually have to look at each letter and process it before you can decide, oh yeah, I see an X, I should respond. So we have an easy task that demands not that much of your attention, really, and a hard task that demands much more of your attention. And so what Forster and Lavie asked was, if you're distracted while you're doing these tasks, what's impacted more, the easy task or the hard task? And so we can see the results on the right here. And I should say on the y-axis, we just have reaction time. So how long does it take participants to actually spot the N or the X? And what's interesting is that they found that when a distractor appeared on the screen, so in this case, a cartoon dog, that distractor actually impacted the easy task more than the hard task. So reaction times were slowed more in the easy task than they were in the hard task. And, at first thought, that seems kind of weird, but if you think about perceptual load theory, how it works, this makes perfect sense, right? In the easy task, there's more attentional resource remaining to basically be distracted by the distractor. So you're more likely to actually process that distractor because the task is so easy and you're not using all of your attentional resource. In the hard task, there's less attentional resource left over, and so you're less likely to process that distractor, and you're actually less distracted. So it impacts your performance less in the hard task. And you can see that via the change in reaction times as depicted by these gray bars on the plot. So task-irrelevant stimuli impacted the easy task more than the hard task. And this perfectly supports perceptual load theory. So after that last example, you might be thinking, does this mean that if I'm doing something really easy, I'm more distractible? And the answer is yes, it does. Your ability to ignore task-irrelevant stimuli depends on how difficult the task is that you're currently doing, right? So more of your attentional resource is used up. Task-irrelevant stimuli, distractions, are going to bother you less. But distractions that are very salient, so very noticeable, will bother you more. So our ability to ignore task-irrelevant stimuli depends both on how easy the task is that we're doing and the salience or noticeability of the task-irrelevant stimuli. And so we can demonstrate that using the Stroop task. This is a very famous task that simply has participants name the color that they see. And so in this case, very simple, colored square. It's red, green, blue. So here there's a distractor, right, which is a word for a color, and it's not the color that you're seeing. So this distractor has high salience, and it's more likely to actually be distracting, right? So in this task, people are slowed down in this case because of the distractor, because the word has such high salience. Now, of course, the answer here is the color is blue, the color is green, and the color is red. But the point is that in the Stroop task, the effect of the task-relevant stimuli is powerful because the stimuli is so salient. So we've reached the end of the lecture and the lecture review. Question 1. What's dichotic listening? What does it show? Question 1. What's dichotic listening? What does it show? Dichotic listening involves hearing 2 different streams of audio in each ear and attending to one stream. Dichotic listening tasks show that we perceive really little of what we're not actively attending to. And this was famously shown by Colin Cherry in his dichotic listening study around in the 1950s and many studies after that. So initial attempts to model attention were based on early versus late selection. What's the difference between early selection and late selection models of attention? The difference relates to where attention acts to filter out unattended information. So in early selection models, attention acts very early on to filter out information that we're not attending to so that it doesn't reach the level of understanding. In late selection models, attention acts later on so that some of the information that we're not attending to does reach the level of understanding. As we saw, there's actually evidence for both early selection models and late selection models. And so this led to a new idea of perceptual load theory. What is perceptual load theory? Question 3, what is perceptual load theory? Perceptual load theory proposes that attention is a resource. And so the idea here is that easy tasks allow us to perceive more of unattended information. Hard tasks allow us to perceive less, right? So if we're doing a dichotic listening study and we're asked to shadow one stream, very hard resource grabbing task, and so we have little of our attentional engine left to actually register anything from that unattended stream. If we're doing a task that's quite easy, we have more resource left, and so we actually can understand and perceive things that we're not attending to.